Imagine, a high-profile case, the courtroom is on edge, and the fate of a powerful individual hangs in the balance. Suddenly, the judge reads a statement, a game-changing statement, that no one saw coming. The entire courtroom falls silent, the air thick with anticipation. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, is at the center of it all. What happens next will shock you. Let's dive in. Before we dive into the drama that unfolded in the courtroom, let's rewind and take a closer look at the key moments that led up to the shocking revelation. Pam Bondi, a name that has echoed through the halls of Florida politics for years, was no stranger to being in the spotlight. As Florida's Attorney General, she earned a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense leader, known for taking on crime, fighting for consumer rights, and protecting the interests of Floridians. But not all of her time in office was smooth sailing. Her tenure as Attorney General was marked by bold decisions that often placed her in the crosshairs of critics. Her tough stance on various issues, ranging from criminal justice to controversial political stances, had earned her a loyal base of supporters, but also a fair share of detractors. Pam Bondi was a polarizing figure, and she seemed to thrive in the face of adversity. Her no-holds-barred approach to tackling some of Florida's most pressing legal challenges made her a formidable presence in the state's political landscape, but when she found herself in the center of a high-profile legal case, everything changed. This wasn't just another political skirmish or policy debate, the case involved serious, far-reaching allegations that threatened to upend her career and reputation. Over the months leading up to the trial, Pam Bondi's every move was scrutinized, and the pressure began to mount. News outlets, political pundits, and opponents in her own party were all waiting for a major misstep, a crack in her armor. Everyone had their eyes on her, eagerly waiting for the proverbial shoe to drop. What made this case even more intense was the public's perception. Bondi had always been a strong, confident leader, but the legal battle now placed her at the mercy of the courts. She wasn't just defending herself against accusations, she was fighting for her political future. The case was undeniably high-profile, but it was also deeply personal. If the allegations were proven true, it could destroy her career, tarnish her legacy, and leave a permanent stain on her reputation. However, rather than shy away from the limelight or retreat into a defensive position, Bondi chose to confront the situation head-on. Instead of keeping a low profile, she took a bold approach, showing the world that she was willing to go to war. She came out swinging, determined to fight the charges and challenge the ruling that had already been handed down by a lower court. Bondi wasn't just defending herself in the typical sense, she was making a statement. Her legal team worked around the clock, poring over every detail of the case, every bit of evidence, every possible angle. Bondi's defense wasn't just about proving her innocence, it was about challenging the very foundation of the original ruling. She believed the court had made significant errors that couldn't be ignored. She believed the case was built on shaky ground and that crucial facts had been overlooked or misinterpreted. Bondi wasn't content to let the ruling stand. She was determined to expose what she believed were the flaws in the legal process. As the case progressed, it became clear that Pam Bondi was not going down without a fight. Her legal arguments were sharp, calculated, and relentless. She wasn't playing a defensive game, she was aggressively taking the fight to the prosecution. The courtroom was filled with tension as Bondi's defense mounted a challenge that no one had anticipated. People began to wonder if she could actually pull it off, could she turn the tide in her favor? But what really set the stage for the shocking twist that was about to unfold was the sheer audacity of Bondi's strategy. While others might have played it safe, sitting quietly and hoping for a favorable ruling, Bondi took a much bolder approach. She understood that in a high-profile case like this, she couldn't afford to be passive. Every move, every argument, every statement had to be a calculated part of her broader strategy to challenge the ruling. And challenge it she did. Little did anyone know, the dramatic moment that would send shockwaves through the courtroom was just around the corner. Bondi's calculated risk-taking and unwavering determination were about to lead to a revelation that no one saw coming. As the courtroom drama unfolded, it became clear that Bondi's bold challenge was more than just a fight for her career, it was a statement to the world that she was ready to do whatever it took to defend herself and reclaim her standing. As the clock ticked down and the case neared its final moments, no one in the courtroom was prepared for the bombshell that was about to be dropped. What happened next would change everything, shifting the momentum of the trial and altering the course of Pam Bondi's political and legal future. The twist no one saw coming was only moments away, and it would prove to be a turning point in a case that had already captured the attention of the nation. But before we get into that pivotal moment, it's important to remember just how much was riding on this for Pam Bondi. With every argument, every word spoken in that courtroom, she was betting everything on her ability to challenge the ruling, and, ultimately, her ability to win this high-stakes battle. What happened next would not only shape the rest of the trial but also define her legacy in Florida politics. It was a regular Tuesday, or so it seemed, when Pam Bondi stepped into the courtroom. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The case, which had already garnered widespread attention, was now at a crucial juncture. Bondi wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was standing at the intersection of political fate and personal redemption. Her career, which had seen its share of highs and lows, now hung in the balance. If this challenge failed, it would be more than just a legal loss. Her reputation, already bruised by months of controversy, would suffer a near-fatal blow. The stakes could not have been higher. Bondi was no stranger to pressure. Throughout her tenure as Florida's Attorney General, she had faced numerous political and legal battles, but this one felt different. This was no ordinary courtroom drama. It was a fight for her future, and every word spoken in the courtroom could tip the scales in one direction or another. Her legal team, a group of sharp and experienced attorneys, had been working tirelessly behind the scenes. For weeks, they had meticulously combed through the details of the case, seeking out any potential weaknesses in the original ruling. They weren't just looking for a way out, they were looking for a fundamental flaw. They believed the initial judgment had been based on a misinterpretation of the facts, and they were prepared to prove it. Bondi's defense wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about shining a light on what she believed were critical oversights by the court that had led to an unfair verdict. The courtroom was buzzing with the weight of it all. Legal teams, journalists, and observers from all sides were present, all with eyes on Bondi. She was ready to face the court, but even the most seasoned politicians feel the weight of the moment when their futures are on the line. As Bondi sat at the defense table, she was calm, but there was an unmistakable fire in her eyes. It wasn't just about winning. It was about righting what she saw as a wrong. Her legal team opened the arguments with a clear, well-prepared presentation. They began by dissecting the original judgment, piece by piece. Each point was methodically addressed, each interpretation scrutinized, and the mistakes in the initial ruling laid bare. They argued that crucial facts had been either ignored or misunderstood, leading to a verdict that did not reflect the true nature of the case. Bondi's lawyers painted a picture of an overly simplified case, one that had failed to consider the complexities of the issue at hand. With each new argument, Bondi's confidence grew. She knew the truth was on her side, and her legal team was doing their job in presenting it clearly and forcefully. The courtroom, which had initially been filled with skepticism, began to feel different. People were starting to listen. The tide was shifting. But as the day wore on, the tension in the room reached its peak. The question that lingered in the air was no longer if Bondi's team could win the case, but whether their arguments would be enough to sway the judge. With every new piece of evidence presented, there was a collective holding of breath in the room. The judge, known for being measured and impartial, sat silently, listening carefully. You could almost hear the internal deliberation as the arguments unfolded before him. Would he be convinced? Would he agree that the original judgment had been flawed? Or would he uphold the ruling, leaving Bondi and her team with nothing? Bondi's resolve was palpable. She had been through many battles in her political career, but this one felt different. It was personal. Every argument, every word, every moment in the courtroom was a step toward vindication. But she knew that the final decision wasn't hers to make, it was in the judge's hands. All she could do was present the truth as she saw it, and hoped that the judge would recognize the weight of her arguments. But as the hours passed, the tension only grew. Those watching from the sidelines, the journalists, the political pundits, and the court staff, all understood the gravity of the situation. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, filled with the weight of 1,000 questions. Could the judge be persuaded to change his mind? Would the facts speak for themselves, or would they fall on deaf ears? Bondi, sitting at the table, occasionally glanced at her legal team. Their expressions were hard to read, but it was clear they believed in their case. The case wasn't just about defending a former attorney general, it was about challenging the system, about pushing back against what she saw as an unjust ruling. But in the back of her mind, a lingering thought gnawed at her: what if it wasn't enough? With each passing minute, the room seemed to grow quieter, more intense. The defense had laid out its case, but would it be enough to overcome the weight of the original verdict? Bondi couldn't know for sure, but one thing was clear: she had given it everything she had. All she could do now was wait for the final judgment. And as the final arguments concluded, the courtroom held its breath, knowing that the next moment would change everything. Would Pam Bondi's bold challenge to the ruling succeed, or would the judge uphold the original verdict? The answer, which would soon be revealed, was destined to shock everyone in that room. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as the judge announced a brief recess. It wasn't just any ordinary break, the entire room seemed to hold its collective breath, as the brief silence was filled with the hushed murmur of speculation. What would happen next? Would the judge side with Bondi and her defense team, or would he uphold the original ruling that had been handed down earlier? The stakes had never been higher, and in a case this high profile, no one could predict which way the judge's decision would swing. Everyone slowly returned to their seats, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. The sense of anticipation was electric, almost palpable. Each individual in that courtroom, from the defense team to the prosecution, from the journalists to the spectators, knew that the next words spoken would shape the future for Pam Bondi. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, waiting for the moment when the judge would finally break the silence. When the judge re-entered the courtroom, a wave of tension passed over the room. The air seemed thick with uncertainty. The judge, known for his stern but fair approach to the law, took his seat at the bench and adjusted his glasses. His demeanor was composed, but his next words would be anything but ordinary. The room was utterly still, with every eye locked on him. Even the defense team, who had been confident in their arguments, couldn't hide the anticipation that danced in their expressions. Then, the judge began speaking, and as he did, his voice was calm but carried an undeniable weight. "I have reviewed the facts, the arguments, and the points presented in this case, and I have come to a conclusion that will surprise many," the judge said, pausing just long enough to let the words sink in. Bondi's legal team, who had worked tirelessly on this case, exchanged nervous glances. They had been prepared for a range of possible outcomes, but they were still bracing for the final decision. Bondi sat silently, her hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the judge. The room was completely still, waiting for what would come next. The judge didn't waste time with pleasantries. His next words hit like a bombshell. "I am challenging the ruling as it stands." The initial verdict was based on a critical error that cannot be overlooked. The weight of the judge's statement echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls and into the hearts of those present. The words were sharp, unexpected, and shocking, especially for those who had anticipated the ruling to go in favor of the prosecution. For weeks, the case had been framed as one where the initial verdict seemed unshakable, and many believed that Bondi's defense would be overpowered by the weight of the evidence. But the judge had just done the unthinkable. He was challenging the ruling. The room erupted in stunned silence, with eyes darting between each other in disbelief. Those who had expected a ruling in favor of the prosecution were now sitting in disbelief. The judge had essentially thrown the entire case back into the fire. He was calling out a major flaw in the original judgment, and that was something no one had seen coming. For Bondi's defense team, however, it was the moment they had been waiting for. A sense of relief swept over them as they absorbed the implications of what had just been said. They had spent weeks meticulously preparing their argument, carefully breaking down every misstep in the original ruling, and now it seemed as though their hard work had paid off. Bondi's legal team leaned toward each other, exchanging quiet words of triumph, though their faces remained composed. The decision wasn't final just yet, but the shift was monumental. The judge's challenge to the original ruling was an unexpected twist that shifted the momentum in Bondi's favor. The entire case, which had seemed like a near impossible battle, now appeared to be on the verge of a dramatic turnaround. For Bondi herself, the shock of the moment was apparent, but there was a spark of something else in her eyes: hope. This wasn't just a legal victory, this was a lifeline. She had fought hard, pushing back against a ruling that she and her team believed was flawed. Now, the judge had essentially agreed that something had gone wrong in the original case. In that moment, she knew that the tides had turned. The courtroom was buzzing with energy now, the initial shock beginning to wear off, replaced by a simmering excitement. Lawyers on both sides were taking in the judge's words, their minds racing with the implications. Bondi's team exchanged quick, excited looks, but they knew this wasn't the end of the road. There would still be hurdles ahead, but this was the breakthrough they had been hoping for. And while the prosecution side scrambled to process the judge's statement, it was clear that the entire complexion of the case had changed. A critical error had been identified, one that could potentially shift the entire verdict in favor of Bondi. The judge's decision had sent shockwaves through the courtroom, and with it, a new wave of energy surged through Bondi's camp. What had begun as a day full of uncertainty was quickly turning into a moment of redemption. The judge had opened a door, and now it was up to Bondi and her legal team to walk through it. The road ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Bondi and her team felt they were on the right path. The battle wasn't over, but this statement, this bold move by the judge, was a moment they would never forget. In the hours and days that followed the judge's earth-shattering statement, the public's reaction was nothing short of explosive. Social media lit up in a frenzy of comments, debates, and discussions, each post adding fuel to an already burning fire. People from all corners of the political spectrum, legal experts, and everyday citizens began weighing in on what had just unfolded in the courtroom. For some, this was an undeniable victory for Pam Bondi. They viewed the judge's decision as a massive win, a moment of validation for Bondi, and proof that she had been right all along. To them, it was not just about the specifics of the case, it was about resilience. The fact that Bondi had managed to take on a high-profile case, stand her ground against mounting scrutiny, and challenge a flawed ruling spoke volumes about her determination and commitment to justice. Supporters rallied behind her, expressing their admiration for her fight and the boldness with which she had stood up to what many saw as a miscarriage of justice. But for others, the reaction was more critical. The shockwaves of the judge's ruling didn't just spark excitement, they ignited fierce debates and raised serious concerns. Many opponents of Bondi, including political adversaries and legal analysts, began questioning the judge's decision. Some claimed that the ruling had been swayed by favoritism or that it was the result of political maneuvering behind the scenes. Was this truly an impartial decision, or had external pressures influenced the judge's choice? Was Bondi benefiting from a system that was too lenient on her because of her political connections or previous stature? In the eyes of some, the decision smacked of bias, and the allegations of political influence didn't stop there. Bondi, after all, was a seasoned political figure with deep ties to the state's power structure. Critics argued that the legal system should be above such influences, but this ruling, they believed, raised red flags about whether the law had been applied fairly or whether Bondi's reputation and connections had somehow tipped the scales in her favor. Despite the criticism, for Bondi herself, this moment marked a hard-earned redemption. The challenges she had faced throughout her career, attacks from political opponents, media scrutiny, and public doubt, had been overwhelming at times. Yet, against all odds, she had managed to pull off the unthinkable. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was a symbol of her resilience, her unwavering belief in her own cause, and her ability to rise above the challenges that seemed insurmountable. In many ways, this victory wasn't only about defending her name, it was about proving to herself and to the public that she wasn't going to back down, even when the odds were stacked against her. However, as much as the ruling was a triumph, it was not without its controversies. The media buzzed with ongoing debates, dissecting every part of the judge's statement, and wondering what it meant for the legal landscape going forward. Questions that had been lingering throughout the trial now intensified: was the judge's decision the right one? Had Bondi's defense truly exposed a critical error in the original ruling, or had they simply found a loophole that allowed them to overturn the verdict? Legal experts weighed in, with some applauding the judge for his willingness to challenge the status quo and re-examine the case. Others, however, questioned the validity of Bondi's defense. Was the original judgment really as flawed as the defense team had suggested? Or had the judge been too quick to let his decision be swayed by the powerful arguments presented by Bondi's legal team? Many also pointed out that the legal system often requires checks and balances, but this ruling raised concerns about how much influence one individual's defense team could have on the outcome of a case. The media coverage was relentless, with news outlets across the country debating the broader implications of the judge's decision. Many wondered what this would mean for future cases where powerful figures were involved. Would this ruling set a precedent for overturning judgments simply because a well-funded defense team could mount a successful challenge? Or would it encourage more transparency and fairness in legal proceedings? The debate quickly expanded beyond just this case: what had happened in the courtroom. Courtroom had sparked conversations about the broader state of the judicial system and the influence of politics in legal matters. For Pam Bondi, however, this was just the beginning of an even larger battle. The courtroom drama may have reached a climactic moment, but the consequences of the ruling were far from over. The media was already turning its attention to what would come next. Would the prosecution appeal? Would this decision be overturned by a higher court? And, perhaps most importantly, would the public perception of Bondi shift in the coming months? In the days following the judge's statement, it became clear that this case was far from settled. Even as Bondi celebrated her victory, she knew that she couldn't let her guard down. The controversy surrounding the judge's decision would likely follow her for months to come, and as she prepared for the next chapter of this legal saga, she had to brace herself for the inevitable scrutiny and the challenges that would continue to arise. What had started as a courtroom battle for Bondi's reputation had now transformed into a much larger political and legal drama. The stakes had never been higher, and the eyes of the nation were watching closely to see how this case would unfold in the months ahead. For Pam Bondi, the fight was far from over, and this victory was just one chapter in a much longer story. As the dust from the courtroom drama began to settle, one question lingered in the air, hanging over the legal world like a thick fog: what does this case mean for future legal proceedings? Pam Bondi's bold challenge to the ruling had far-reaching implications that extended far beyond her own legal battle. In many ways, this case served as a wake-up call to the public, the legal community, and the political world. Bondi's victory wasn't just about her, it was about how the legal system can be tested, challenged, and, at times, corrected. Her challenge served as a potent reminder that no matter how powerful or influential someone may be, the legal system has the power to hold them accountable. Bondi, a former attorney general with decades of political experience, was a prominent figure with a vast network of connections. Many expected her position and influence to grant her a certain level of protection in the courtroom. However, her legal team demonstrated that, in a fair system, even the most well-connected individuals can be subject to scrutiny, especially if the case at hand reveals flaws in the original judgment. The case underscored the complexity and vulnerability of the judicial process. The legal system, while based on strict rules and precedents, is never perfect. Even the most confident decisions can be overturned when new evidence comes to light or when critical facts are re-evaluated in a different context. Bondi's challenge to the original ruling brought that complexity to the forefront, reminding everyone that the pursuit of justice is an evolving process. It's not static, it can change and shift when new information or legal arguments arise. For those who had believed that certain decisions were set in stone, Bondi's case was a stark reminder that nothing is ever truly final in the eyes of the law. While the legal world was busy debating the implications of Bondi's challenge, for her, the immediate victory secured her position in the public eye for the time being. This wasn't just a legal win, it was also a political victory, especially considering the public scrutiny she had faced throughout the case. Her ability to overturn the initial ruling elevated her status among supporters and detractors alike. She had proven that she could still wield power in the courtroom, and the fact that she had succeeded against significant odds only bolstered her image as a fierce and resilient figure. But this victory also cast a new spotlight on her political career. After the trial, Bondi found herself back in the public eye, not just as a legal figure but as a symbol of perseverance and strategic maneuvering. While some applauded her, others saw her challenge as an opportunity to revisit her controversial political decisions. The courtroom victory didn't automatically erase the baggage that came with her tenure as Florida's Attorney General. In fact, it only added fuel to the fire. Political opponents quickly seized on the ruling as further proof of her connections and influence, suggesting that her legal maneuvering had been more about leveraging power than seeking justice. Bondi would now find herself embroiled in another battle, a political one, where her every move would be scrutinized, analyzed, and often criticized. So, what's next for Pam Bondi? Would she continue to fight in the public eye, capitalizing on the momentum of her legal victory? Or would this case mark the beginning of a quieter chapter in her life, where she chose to step back and let the dust settle before deciding on her next move? Given her history of resilience and her reputation for taking on high-profile challenges, it's likely that this case won't be the last time she's thrust into the political or legal spotlight. For Bondi, the battle may have been won, but the war, in both the courtroom and the public sphere, was far from over. And for those watching closely, this courtroom drama will certainly be remembered for years to come. It has already become a case study in the power of the legal system to challenge even the most entrenched rulings, and it sparked a conversation about the way power, influence, and accountability intersect in the modern legal and political landscape. As the legal world evolves, more eyes will be watching, waiting to see if this case will serve as a precedent for others. Will more powerful figures challenge rulings in similar dramatic fashion? Will this case open the door for a new era of legal accountability? Only time will tell. As the dust settles on Bondi's case, we can be sure of one thing: the public is watching. The legal landscape is shifting, and with it, the expectations of how legal battles, especially high-profile ones, should unfold. This case will not be easily forgotten, and its impact will continue to shape the way the public, the media, and politicians view the intersection of law and power in the years to come. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more updates on legal drama, political battles, and everything in between. Let us know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Did the judge make the right call? Or do you think Pam Bondi still has a long road ahead? We want to hear from you.